Hi folks, I'm Andy from Mantic Games, and in this video we're going to explore the ranged phase of Kings of War Champions. Once you've finished moving all of your units, it's time to make those ranged attacks with those units that can do so. Now, only units with a ranged weapon, such as a bow or a ranged attack like a spell, can be chosen to make attacks in this ranged phase. You'll know which units can do this, as in their SH stat there'll be a number beside it. Any with the dash symbol do not have a ranged attack. Pick one of your units at a time, choose the target for them to shoot at, and then let loose. Remember that any unit that did not receive an order in the movement phase is considered to have had the default halt order, and any unit that received an at the double or a charge order cannot take part in this ranged phase. It's also worth noting that if a unit has two or more types of ranged attacks, including spells, it can only use one of them in this ranged attack. Of course, there are always exceptions and it'll specify otherwise. Right, let's get into the action. To resolve a unit's shooting weapons or casting spells with a ranged attack, there are 4 stages. First, you pick your target, make sure you have line of sight to it, and also that it's within your range so that you can shoot it. Next, we roll a hit by rolling the correct number of dice. We then roll to see how much damage we do. And lastly, at the end of the range phase, we then conduct our nerve test on any enemy units that we caused damage to. Let's go through those in a little more detail. Once you've picked your target, we check for line of sight and for range. Remember that we check line of sight by drawing that imaginary straight line from the leader point of our unit to any point on the enemy unit's base. It must not pass through any blocking terrain, a wood, or another unit's base. They must also be at least partially in your front arc. If we look at this stat card for the Watchmen of Tarasios, you can see that the ranged attack information is called out. We can see their crossbows have a 12-inch range with the piercing 1 keyword. We'll cover what the keyword means later, but now we know what our shooting range is, 12 inches. To see if we are in range to attack, we measure the distance between our leader point on our base and the closest point on the enemy unit's base. And if it's equal to or less than our weapon's range, we can go ahead and attack. So now we're good to go and start the attack. And you'll want to know how to do this. First, pick up the number of D6 dice equal to your firing unit's attack value, shown on their stat card. Again, using the Watchmen as an example, their attack value is 8, so we will roll 8 dice to attack. We consult our shoot stat, which you can see here is 4+, so we're rolling 8 dice and need 4s, 5s and 6s to be successful hits. Now before we roll these, there are a few things that can modify this SH target number. One is if you have a specific keyword that gives you a modifier to your shoot stat. In this instance, we don't. And the next thing is if your unit didn't move in the movement phase and received a halt order. This would give you a +1 benefit to your aim, and so the 4+ would improve to a 3+. The last instance would be if your enemy's target unit is in cover. This would make it harder to hit your enemy and so would result in a -1 modifier, reducing the 4+ to a 5+. We'll chat about cover in a second, but on the subject of modifiers, they can stack. So in this example, if a unit had been given the halt order and the enemy was in cover, the +1 and the -1 would cancel each other out and you would be rolling to hit on the 4+ stat. Any dice rolls of a 1 are always considered a miss, even if modifiers have you rolling on a 1+. And if the modifiers mean that you would need to roll more than a 6 to hit, you can still use your ranged attack, but you will half the number of attack dice you roll, rounding down, and you'll be hitting only on a 6. Determining if your enemy is in cover or not is pretty straightforward. If at least half of your enemy's unit base is within a wood or a forest, then they are in cover. Sometimes they might be hiding behind other units or obstacles. In this case, if you have line of sight to less than half of the enemy unit's base, then they're also in cover. So in this instance, our unit has line of sight, they are within shooting range, they had a halt order, but the enemy is in cover, and so we will be rolling 8 dice and needing 4s to hit. We roll a dice, remove each dice that isn't a 4 or more, and we're left with 4 successful hits. Next, we need to roll to wound. We know how many dice to roll as we roll the amount that were successful hits, in this case just 4. But what do we need to achieve with these dice? Here we look to see what our opponent's unit's def or defense value is. The Slithering Bishop has a defense of 4+, so we're rolling 4 dice for the successful hits, needing 4 or above, based upon our opponent's defense. Now, just like rolling to hit, there can be modifiers too. Our Watchmen have the keyword piercing 1 on their crossbows, and as we can see, this means all hits by ranged attacks have a +1 modifier when rolling to damage. That means instead of the defense of 4+, it improves it to 3+. We also have another special rule called Deadeye, and this means that whenever we roll to damage with ranged attack, we must re-roll any dice that roll a 1. So that might help us too. We roll the 4 dice, we re-roll any 1s, and then remove any 2s. We're left with 3 successes. This means we've caused 3 points of damage. Our opponent marks the 3 points of damage against their unit using the damage counters. You may notice that on a stat card there is no maximum number of damage that a unit can take. This is where the nerve tests come in. In Champions, units accumulate damage, and this represents physical damage and casualties to their unit, as well as a decline in their morale, cohesion, and their will to fight. At the end of the ranged phase, we test the nerve of any unit that received damage in this phase. Each unit has a nerve value, for example 13+ as shown here. To test, we roll 2 d6 dice, count up the total, and add it to the total number of damage that the unit has suffered so far. We take into account any modifiers that may be in effect from special rules 2 and compare the total to the nerve value of the enemy unit. In this instance, we roll a 6 and a 3, which totals 9. We add on the 3 points of damage that the unit has taken so far in the game, which adds up to 12. There are no other modifiers, and so the total is 12. If the total is lower than the unit's nerve value, as it is here, the test has been passed and the unit remains steady. If the total is equal to or higher than the nerve value, then the test is failed and the unit is routed and is removed from the game. There are some exceptions to this nerve roll, and you can see these on page 26 of the rules. One big one is if you roll a double 1 on a nerve test, even if this would rout the unit, you always pass the nerve roll. Now remember when we said that you could choose to use your command tokens as a nerve test reroll? Well, this is where you could choose to use 1 token to reroll a single die. Again, there are some caveats to this, and the details are again on page 26. Now units could end up in a position where they have more damage on them than their nerve value, and in those instances the unit would be classed as devastated, indicating the drop in its fighting ability due to a high number of damage. This would cause the unit to half its number of attacks for both ranged and combat attacks. After you've completed and resolved all nerve tests, that's the end of the ranged phase. Now join me in the next video and we'll go over the combat phase.